Welcome from my side. I've learned something today already during this conference. Quantum computing is not anymore in the realm of theory and science fiction. It promises already groundbreaking technological steps for quantum computing, sensing, but also cryptography. And exactly those areas I want to discuss today with my distinguished guest on the panel in the area of defense and security. We already touched upon this, and for this I welcome on stage my distinguished guests who are already there. Please come up, and I introduce you here on stage. And also Adrian is with us because our third panelist cannot be here with us today. So I welcome you now here over to the panel area. So to discuss this issue with you today, I'm very thrilled to be joined by three outstanding experts on this in this field. We have with me here on stage Professor Dr. Jürgen Freudenberger. You are Director of Key Technologies at the Agency for Innovation in Cybersecurity, also known as Cyber Agency here in Germany. You're responsible for the research programs in quantum technologies, for instance, but also cryptography, AI, and autonomous systems. Formerly, you worked as a professor in communication systems in Konstanz. Then next to Mr. Freudenberger, we already said earlier we're going to call each other by our first name. That will be easier. We have Julian von Velzen. You are head of Capgemini's Quantum Lab. This is a global network of quantum experts, partners, and facilities that are focusing on that area, especially in sensing, quantum safe, and quantum safe technologies, and also quantum computing. And not only this, you also have a background in metaphysics, and you are part of the Dutch representative of the European Quantum Consortium, which I find really interesting. This is for Julian. Thank you for being here today. And then you already introduced yourself, Adrian. You have an interesting study with you, and you already touched upon some of the aspects in the area of military and security affairs. So I also welcome you on the panel today. Thank you for being here. So in the next 30 to 40 minutes, we'll dive into the majority of current technologies in that area, the synergies between civilian and military applications, and of course also the steps that organizations need to do in order to prepare for a quantum world. First thing I wanted to ask you, and I thought a lot about the first question, and it was a little bit hard to come up with it. But what is now that I've learned there are so many different quantum technologies, what is the most promising for you in the area of security, but also defense?
I think one thing that's interesting about defense is that it's one of those industries where really all the different quantum technologies are relevant. And so security is critical because there is very sensitive data, but there's also very bespoke solutions that are hard to migrate. There's loads of encryption and baked in hardware across a whole fleet of different operations. Then there are sensors, huge efforts into navigation, timing, sensing, but also maybe intercepting signals, or maybe analyzing biosignals, all kinds of quantum sensors. Quantum computers that may be relevant. We did some work, for example, with DARPA on material design and designing more corrosion-resistive materials and stuff like that. And maybe even quantum communication networks and space communication with quantum communications. So really, there are not so many industries that all of these technologies make sense for, and defense is one of those.
Yeah, maybe if it's about importance, you can also think about the timeline, because I think you have different maturities for the different technologies. So in quantum sensing, you already have sensors that are market available. In quantum key distribution, you have at least systems which are running in test beds. I think in quantum computing, we have the first quantum computers, but they are still a step away from getting practical, so that some presentations here that they can already solve some practical solutions, but I think in the context of military and defense, we do not really see at the moment that the quantum computing is already at that point that we have some advantage. So that means on the timeline, the most important developments are for sure in this area of quantum sensing, which was already also part of the presentation beforehand from Adrian. And but I think as time evolves, we will see that other topics become much more important. So you also addressed this topic of post-quantum cryptography, and this is related to the quantum key distribution. And I think this also is part of this question of migration cryptographic protocols to post-quantum cryptography. So quantum key distribution might play an important role in this setup. So I think it's not that simple to say what is the most important technology, but I completely agree that all of these aspects are interesting in the military and defense situations.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add there. I fully agree on the quantum sensing is more relevant currently because like it's just more mature. I would say it depends also a bit on what you look for. Is it like more offensive or defensive kind of things? I think certain quantum technologies become more relevant, but yeah, I agree.
I want to come back to you for the question of what are the risks too, because you touched upon this in your study as well. But maybe let's dive into the area of quantum sensing first. Jürgen, you said you work on this field at Cyber Agency, specifically in some research programs. Can you tell us more what you do there and what are the first results sort of are and how they might translate into applications in the military area?
Yeah, so we are not working on general questions in military, but as Cyber Agency already says, we are focusing on cybersecurity, and we are looking on aspects where is quantum technology relevant for cybersecurity, and in particular to sensing. For us, the question is what's called side channel attacks, side channel analysis. So when you implement a cryptographic protocol, then you always have some side effects. So you can do things like power measurements in the system, and this can be used for crypto analysis. So that means even if you have a secure algorithm, you can attack the implementation, and so there are different approaches to do that. So depending on what the physical parameters are that you can measure. And what we are doing in a project is investigating whether new quantum sensors can provide information you don't have with classical sensors. So for instance, you can have higher sensitivity regarding magnetic fields, which can be used for power measurements on chips, for instance, or you can have higher resolution in terms of that you get signal quality you cannot achieve with a classical sensor. And that has, of course, impact or might have impact on the way how you have to implement cryptographic algorithms, and you should be aware on what are the possible attacks, and we are investigating what is the role of quantum sensing in this area. So we have the first results, which essentially demonstrate that there are some interesting measurements. So we will probably continue with that. But it's not at the point where you can really do crypto analysis with such sensors. And that's basically our background, is considering technologies that might be ready in 5, 10, 15 years, so that we are investigating on what is the impact of such sensors for future implementations. And that gives also link to other programs. So we are also working on post-quantum cryptography, and so now you have standards also for PQC. But these standards might not be resistant against side channel attacks. So that's where we also have the link to cryptography, where we work on how can you implement the new PQC standards with the resistance against such side channels. So that means we consider the question from the sensoric point, but also on the question of what can you do to become robust against such attacks.
Now you touched on different technologies again. On one side, cryptography. On the other side, sensing and side channel attacks. I wanted to ask you, Julian, also in your daily work, sort of what technologies do you look at, and how mature do you assess them for military applications? What are current developments with your clients?
So what we're trying to work on is, so I think many of the technologies, whether or not we're talking about sensors or computing or quantum communication networks, amazing things have happened over the past years, over the past decades, and we're now at a stage where quantum sensors are showing remarkable results in a lab environment. But it doesn't mean that they're ready to use. It's a very often these are theoretical cases. In quantum computing, I think that's most obvious, right? There's toy models, it's theorized systems, it's algorithms that are, they work on small scales, but they're hard to see how they would scale to larger systems. And so in a lot of respects, it's sort of a technology or looking for a solution. And what we're trying to do is to go the other way around, to try to see what is it that the industry needs. So if we're talking about quantum computing, it's starting with the application, with the workflow, trying to analyze what is the computational workflow, what are the different computational bottlenecks in there, is there maybe some AI that you can use, maybe some quantum that you could use. And the reality is that very often it's not so easy, right? You end up with massive molecules or systems that are, circuit depths of millions and billions of gates and thousands of qubits, and so there's a huge gap. In sensing, I think it's a similar story. There are now systems that are, I think the number one application that people talk about in defense is navigation. Right, so navigating in situations where GNSS is denied. And so, for example, there was recently this plane from Ursula von der Leyen, right? That the navigation was blocked due to jammers. And so the idea is, if you can use a quantum sensors and map the magnetic field and compare that to a known map, you don't need to have a connection with the satellites. And so, potentially very interesting. But the thing is, that's super interesting, but having a sort of a test setup is not the same as having that in a plane, a commercial plane. It's not the same as having that into a fighter jet. At that point, you have to really start thinking about how do these systems look like? How big are they? How heavy are they? How do they integrate with existing technologies? Do they sit in the nose? Is there environmental nose? Do they sit in the wing? There's all these questions, and I think then the reality is that we probably won't have them next year or in the next 5 years probably, but maybe in 10 years, and that's enough prospect for us to work on these things.
Yeah, oftentimes when it comes to technology and the application then of it in the military domain, you need not only the technology readiness or the maturity of it, but you also need the conceptual maturity and the operational need on the side of the actual operators of the systems, right? So this all needs to come together when it comes to applications and use cases. You said a very interesting thing. You said, okay, you go the other way around sometimes actually, and you start with what the industry needs. Do you sometimes also hear this from the public domain, from military users, that they come to you with a problem and you are trying to think about this from a quantum perspective, let's say?
So I would say not nearly enough. But maybe first let me say that I think defense has a sort of a dual role, right? They should play a central role in making sure that we build a local supply chain, that build capability, that we keep some sort of technological sovereignty and having our components built in Europe and all of that, because there is value for defense purposes to keep that within Europe. And so regardless of what really is the application pool, if you like, just making sure that technology is here is important. At the same time, I think defense, just like any other company, should do much more to think about what really are the applications. And I don't think that happens enough. I think the vast majority of quantum computing research is really technology looking for a solution that is very unlikely to scale. We do have some examples the other way around. So, for example, we work with Airbus, for example, and they have this. So it's sort of defense, but They are doing loads of things in material design, and then particularly in corrosion-resistive materials. So this is huge labs. They have physical labs. They have digital material science teams, and there's people that have computational chemistry, quantum chemistry capabilities, all of that. But the way they're doing that now is they have these models to simulate defects and to simulate these structures. But these models, they depend on certain parameters like oxygen reduction or oxygen evolution reaction, and they are really difficult to simulate or to get experimentally. And so that was a starting point of a collaboration where we looked like, can we do that maybe on a quantum computer? So really starting from the point that, hey, we have this model, we need these parameters, but they're not obtainable in the way that we want them. Maybe is there a quantum computer instead of let's get some kind of ground state energy or something.
Yes. One small point to add. I was last year on a conference in Warsaw on defense. I don't know if anyone was there, and there were some representatives from Ukraine there, like 6, 7, and they were like really kind of requesting, okay, if you have something to test, so if it's not market ready, but like something to test, just give it to us. So there's definitely the request from that side, although I really don't know if anything came after this. But like in this like very actual war situation, they were really like, okay, we're gonna test everything which is there, if it's somehow applicable. I don't know if that adds like to your story as well, but yeah.
Yeah, it sort of brings me to the point of collaboration, right? How does industry, the digital sector, and also the public domain work together, maybe in a completely new field, although there are different timelines, as you put it. Maybe from your perspective, Jürgen, at Cyber Agency, is there how do you look at this when it comes to collaboration in this completely new field, or a field that is yet far away from, let's say, the military application of it?
Well, somehow it's our role. So the basic idea to start with the Cyber Agency was also to test some innovative procurement methods, so that we are still in this framework somehow from military, but we're also funded from the Ministry of the Interior. So that means we are working for 2 ministries, which is somehow quite new idea for having an in-house company of the federal government, but also on having innovative procurement methods. And one method that we use relatively often in our programs, that's PCP, pre-commercial procurement. That's a procurement method that allows to establish challenges, so that, for instance, regarding quantum technologies, we have one project on a mobile quantum computer, and there one of the scientific questions is what technology, quantum computing technology, we can use for building quantum computers that are mobile, so not stationary in computer centers. And that's something that is designed as a challenge in terms of that we are now working with 3 groups, research groups, and they have different technologies. We will benchmark after a certain period these technologies, and then decide what group will in the end build as a demonstrator of a mobile quantum computer. And that's also somehow this answer to your previous question on how do you deal with technologies in terms of military and defense if they are at a very low technology readiness level. So I think for quantum computer, we're still at a low technology readiness level. And then designing this program basically came from the impulse comes from the military, saying, okay, if quantum computers are actually useful, if they are available, then we don't need them just in computer centers. We need a certain level of mobility. So that's essentially the research question we are addressing at that point. But we are still not at the point where we can answer what will be the use case. So I think that's the important aspect of saying what in the end will be the applications of the quantum computer itself. But we are looking into particular aspects of getting it mobile and getting also security levels, because I think many people that are currently thinking about quantum computers, they're thinking about getting it ready for some application. They're probably not quite so keen on developing secure quantum computing, and I think it's a good idea to already start from the beginning of the design to think about security also of such systems, which is of course very important if it comes to military applications. So our role is, on the one hand side, to somehow bridge this gap in the area of fundamental research, of addressing technology topics which are not at the technology readiness level, where it's immediately clear what the applications are, but thinking about what the military, what the police forces will need in the future. And on the other hand, also establishing new ideas about procurement, getting faster procurement processes, and also maybe more agile procurement, because these challenges, they're quite different in terms of that typically in procurement you define exactly what you want, and here it's research. So the idea here is that we really design challenges and way of benchmarking intermediate steps, and this is completely different from classical procurement, which might also give an impulse to how we develop systems in the future, and maybe faster than what was done in the past. So I think in quantum computing there might still be a longer timeline. If you're also here discussing AI, it's quite difficult to say what is needed in 5 to 10 years, and I think there it's also very important that somehow we are thinking about procurement processes which become agile at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely leaving out the question of technology maturity a bit, but focusing more on the collaboration side, I think is then very important if this is not the case yet. But we have the benefit of having you here, Julian, who has also a lot of experience in the Netherlands, but you also said you work together with DARPA, which I find very interesting, and Airbus too. So is that something you also observe somewhere else, like this sort of type of collaboration? How is it done maybe elsewhere? What can we learn from that? When you hear the way of how we collaborate now here in Germany on those things.
So there are many differences between countries. Let me think. So I think, first of all, I guess there's a lot that we can learn from the US. I think there has been, and so I like the perspective of really thinking about it, of the different TRLs and the technology maturity. Right, but PQC is super urgent now, no reason to wait. The sensors need to be procured, and it's in procurement type of models. Quantum computing needs to be secured and having local supply chains, and then it's a bit more exploratory. What we see in the US, for example, is that the government has been years ahead in setting up guidelines about PQC migration. You know, quite a few years ago, the Office of Budget Administration or something like that requested everyone that's applied to the military and to the government to make a plan about when systems could be quantum safe. And now there's very clear, very clear mandates that you need to be quantum safe for particular systems. When in more sort of future technologies like quantum computing, DARPA and ARPA-E and ARPA-I and all these different institutes have been very instrumental in driving this technology. And I think what we can learn there is that they have very strong program managers that actually drive a particular vision, right? So whereas here we have sometimes it's a bit of a grant here and there, but it's very loose. There is one institute that has one program, one vision, and if you have a project, you know, you're being stalked every day by these program managers to make sure that the work that you're doing is relevant to that program. I mean, it has to be said that in Europe it's a bit fragmented, so which is an issue. There is initiatives in the German ministry, there's DLR, there is the Dutch ministry. I know 3 different Dutch quantum groups within that are related to the ministry, the intelligence, the military intelligence, the normal intelligence. Then there's France. I mean, there's so many different institutes which all have their own opinion, which I think is further complication.
Maybe Adrian, was that also part of your study? How different countries collaborate with the industry in this area?
It is part of the study. where we didn't write the report yet. So therefore, this is the second phase.
Can you tell us something about it?
On the collaboration, I actually have no insight in that. I have to say.
But then maybe I want to come back to the thing that you said earlier, the more urgent things about post-quantum cryptography. What are the steps that are needed there that you maybe see somewhere else but are not done here in Germany that we need to act faster on? Because, well, to have secure communication is one key aspect in all aspects in the military and security area.
So the migration to post-quantum cryptography is super urgent, right? And I think it's particularly urgent in defense because there are so many critical systems, because there's very difficult to upgrade systems, and because there's so many bespoke solutions that require specific attention. What did I want to say? What was your question again? Sorry.
Maybe Jürgen, you jump in. Do you have a view on this? What are the things that are missing here in Germany so that we can act faster on this urgent matter?
I think migration is quite a difficult task, and I think it's already addressed, but it's addressed on different levels. So I think it's the first part is what was already mentioned, that you look for the very risky systems like military system, but of course you also have this in other government organizations. So I think at that point we already have a plan for migration, but this is also something that has to be implemented in the industry, and it's also in private sector. And I think that the different countries have different migration plans. So for the European Union now we have a migration plan, so I think that's at least a good idea to have a roadmap and defining timelines on that. Whether these are too slow or not, that's of course a valid discussion. I think the US had a much more ambitious plan to be faster on that point, but this of course depends also a bit on the predicted timeline that we have for the migration. I guess that the big problem is that we cannot migrate all systems, so that means for many years we will have the problem that post-quantum cryptography will only be available to certain systems. But if you look for the industry, if you look for IoT devices, we also need other mechanisms, not only the cryptographic itself, but mechanisms for using architectures where you have basically also systems which are not PQC ready, because we will have such systems in IoT systems probably for decades. And in the end, I think the standardization was like the first point for where the industry was waiting, but I think now we also have to understand this urgency, because it's such a huge task, and getting basically everything PQC ready is, I think, still something where we not even at the assessment of understanding where all the cryptographic components are that we have to change. So I think that's something where it's good to have this starting point from the roadmap perspective, but I think we also need the awareness that things have to change.
I just want to highlight that point actually, because like many experts and also the panel in the morning said this, the awareness, especially by companies which are smaller, so SMEs, that this is not there at all. So the big companies seem to be aware, they have people at least thinking about it, how to do it, and some don't know it at all, that this might be important. And then like from that point, getting the knowledge to actually implement it, also some timeline. So like that there's really a difference between companies and institutions to get there.
And maybe one thing that I think is different in defense compared to other industries is that that there is, for example, we do loads of work in financial services relating to post-quantum cryptography migration, and there are so many different industry groups, or how do you say that, like the AIDAQ or others, that have industry white papers and that help each other, and there is best practices, and there are specific conferences. I have never seen any of this on defense, right? It's much less open, and I think there's a lot to learn from each other.
Yeah, you said this. You prepare a lot of organization for like a quantum world, if I can put it like this, in different aspects of the technology. Is there something that especially security or military organizations could learn from non-military or like enterprises, companies as such? What do you do, or what work do you do with them that could relate also to the military and to security organizations, to prepare them to a world where quantum sensing is there, where this secure communication could be infringed upon, and where, I don't know, post-quantum cryptography is also there and stuff like that. So
what defense can learn from other industries? One thing is more transparency, maybe, particularly in post-quantum cryptography migration. I think that would really help. Do you have other things?
I mean, like this conference I was in Warsaw, I can just recall again to it. At least there were actors which were openly exchanging ideas what is needed. So like there was at least one example of like kind of an open exchange, and where industry who develops and also like military sites who see what is happening at least exchange some ideas. But like I'm not sure what came out of this. Yeah.
I think from my perspective, it's important that the application is somehow demonstrated. So I think if you want to convince people in the military, then you basically need also to show the use cases. It's very difficult if it's on a very abstract level. So because the procedures are such that you need to know what is actually the improvement we get from a certain technology. And so it's important, even if at an early stage, to demonstrate that systems are useful. And that's, of course, at the point where this might not work in maybe an airplane, but on other levels. And I think this getting things to a point where it's clear that this has an advantage, and also an advantage for the defense users, I think that's quite important, and is an important step in getting into the planning processes, because it's very difficult to do planning if you don't know what the actual application, what the actual use case is, and these processes are relatively slow. So I think it's good to get to a stage where you can have at least proof of concepts or some evaluation. For instance, in the quantum key distribution, you have a test bench for different technologies in Germany, where they are already establishing certain links and are testing what are the data rates for the key exchange and so on. So you have some test bed for evaluating different technologies, and I think that's quite important to demonstrate such a technology even at a level where it's not really commercial at that point. Yeah, and that's also something that can probably be done with sensing applications, might still be a bit difficult in the quantum computing field, but I think in this case it's also important to have somehow field tests that demonstrate just a certain level of application, so that the awareness is also there to get such technologies into the planning process. So the planning typically starts with knowing what the use cases are, and not just knowing there is a technology that might change things. That's a bit difficult, so at that point.
I didn't want to leave out the last sort of topic that I had planned for the panel, which is the topic of risk and what we have to worry of, because you also mentioned that in your short talk. So you can either choose now if you want to give a short key recommendation for government agencies in the area of quantum and defense, or if you have one last thing to say about what we have to worry of, what are the risks of quantum computing. Maybe we do a last round, all of you.
This is a big one. So there are some studies on which kind of applications are possible. So I don't know, Michael Krelina published on this and others. So you can read like which kind of applications are possible. In terms of risks, I would say depends on which level we look at. So we do assessment, so we try to see what are people doing and what might come out of it. And therefore you can look on, okay, what are other countries, regions also developing, and how do we need like to to foresee and adapt to this. This might be a risk. At the same time, what do we want to develop in terms of military applications to secure ourselves, defend ourselves, I don't know, in certain wars in the future, or whatever might happen? Or when you look at globally, okay, which risks are there of quantum technology applications? So there are different levels on that. And you can pick like a lot of things, and people talk about, I don't know, this problem of submarine detection and the problem of nuclear deterrence when we have sensors which map where the submarines are, and then we don't have the second strike possibility anymore. Others say, okay, we're going to develop something new on that. And there are a lot of questions we need to look on that, and I have the feeling we don't know a lot of things there yet, why I like openly said we need more research on that. I would say in Germany we are not really decided what we all want. Like we have this Zeitenwende, and it's not fully decided yet what we want to develop totally yet. And yeah, that's just my feeling about it. You probably know more about it, but it's, yeah.
Short answer from you too.
Actually, I think the biggest risk is not from the technology point itself. I think this is what we're also discussing in the AI sector, sovereignty. So what is needed to build complex systems, and I think a quantum computer will be a complex system for a while. So, and if you're thinking about superconductive quantum computer, it's not the quantum computer only, it's the cooling system, the software you need. And it's a rather complex thing, and you need probably devices from many different countries. And as we all know, is that the leading countries are not located within Europe. So I think that quantum computing is a good example of that. We have to think about sovereignty, and this includes many components. And I think we are not quite aware of all these dependencies. So we had this presentation in the Vision Dome this morning about the processor outside of the US and this 2-nanometer technology, which isn't only available in Taiwan. And I think there's such a huge dependency in the electronic market on Taiwan as the single supplying nation for the high-node technologies, and probably similar problems might come up if we look for quantum technology. So I think supply chains and securing supply chains, securing also IP on that, I think is at least as important as the technology itself. So.
Okay, maybe some thoughts. So I think one on post-quantum cryptography, I think defense is one of those industries where there has been a lot of very capable people doing specific things, but the question is not, the challenge is not the designing the algorithms, the challenge is scaling it up. And I think that has to happen now with urgency and no longer voluntarily. So this has to happen at European scale, much more mandatory with new regulations and policies forcing this. Then on sensing, I think proof of principles have been successful, but the time to production and the time that it actually sits into a fighter jet is much longer than people think. So if we don't start that now, that this would take another 10 years at least, and we don't really have the time. And then third, I think on quantum compute, we are very rapidly seeing loads of money going to the US and capability going to the US. And the past weeks there have been major funding rounds. All of them were US. We don't have any sort of one major quantum company in Europe. So we must do everything to make sure that we have the supply. Well, we have many smaller ones, but we don't have the big ones that like Psi or Inflection or any of those was in the US, Continuum. So we have to make sure that supply chains are in Europe. And a second, if these machines are getting super sophisticated, but if we don't figure out how to use them now, we would risk them not being used in a couple of years. So I think that across those three different topics and different TRLs, there's actions.
Yeah. Thank you for your comprehensive answer then. Yeah, my key takeaway is definitely that we need a whole summit just for quantum and military in the military domain now. But although I think this topic will grow over the next year also within this sort of frame here, we will have the quantum summit next year too here, and we will definitely discuss this again. So thank you very much for your participation here, and you also for listening. And Thank you. Thanks a lot. So back to you, Marie.
Thank you.